The Delta sniper leader held his breath as the shape stumbled closer through the haze of burnt sand and twisted metal. The battlefield around him eerily silent, except for the faint crackle of distant fires and the ghost-like hum of broken machinery. The air smelled of iron and smoke, a thick mixture that clung to the back of his throat like guilt. He adjusted the scope again, but the lens was fogged with sweat and dust, so he wiped it clean on his sleeve and looked once more. And there she was, the wounded female soldier moving in and out of the drifting smoke like a phantom. Her steps uneven, her eyes glazed but fixed on something ahead of her. Something only she could see. Her hand clutched her side where blood soaked through her uniform. Dark and sticky beneath the fading light, she swayed like a tree in the wind about to break. He tried to call out, but his throat refused to form sound. The radio crackled in his ear, an operator asking for a status report, but he did not answer. He could not answer because his mind had gone blank and heavy all at once. He had seen her face before long ago on a mission that had gone wrong in every possible way. Her name came back to him slowly, as if dragged through mud. Sergeant Lena Cross. The one who never missed a shot, the one who laughed before every drop, because she said laughter kept the fear away. She had vanished 2 years ago in an ambush that tore their unit apart. He had led the retreat. She had stayed behind covering them, until her voice disappeared in the static, and the silence that followed had haunted him every night since. Now she was there before him, not a ghost, but something even stranger, because he could not tell if she was real or a mirage made from exhaustion and regret. The air rippled around her as she staggered past the burnt truck that had once carried ammunition. Her lips moved soundlessly. Maybe she was calling for help, or maybe she was repeating something over and over to herself. He slid from his post, his boots sinking into the soft ash, his rifle hanging loosely at his side. He wanted to run to her, but training held him back. Every sound could draw eyes. Every motion could mean death. He crouched behind a broken wall and watched as she fell to one knee, gripping her chest as though holding herself together. The memory of the desert mission came back in jagged flashes, the convoy hit by hidden charges, the sky turning red with fire and sand. He could still hear her voice yelling coordinates through the static, while rounds whistled past their heads, then nothing but static and screaming and silence. He had searched for her for hours until the order came to withdraw. He had never forgiven himself for leaving her body behind, though no body had ever been found. The report had said presumed dead, but he had always known that something about it felt wrong. Now that wrongness stood bleeding before him under a dying sun. He checked the perimeter again, scanning the ridgelines and shadowed structures. There was movement out there, shapes sliding through the smoke like predators waiting their time. The whole area felt wrong, the kind of stillness that came before another strike. He raised his rifle again, but his hands trembled slightly, something he had not felt in years. He steadied his breathing, but his eyes kept pulling back to her. She was closer now, barely 50 meters away. Her helmet gone, her hair matted with dust and sweat, her face cut and pale yet unmistakably hers. She looked up suddenly, her gaze meeting his through the gaps in the crumbling wall. For a moment, time bent around them. The noise, the heat, the weight of years all vanished, leaving only recognition raw and painful. He stepped out from cover slowly, unsure. Whether she would know him or trust him, her hand instinctively reached for her sidearm, but she was too weak to lift it. He lowered his weapon, showing his empty palms, and she hesitated, blinking as if trying to focus her vision. He called her name. Softly, the sound almost lost to the wind. She flinched at the sound, then her expression shifted from confusion to something that looked like disbelief. She whispered something he could not hear, so he moved closer, inch by inch, the ground crunching. Under his boots, every sound too loud in the silence around them. When he finally reached her, she was trembling. Her uniform shredded the insignia barely visible. She looked up again and whispered his name this time, clear enough to break whatever. Spell held him. He dropped to his knees beside her, checking her wounds with quick, precise motions. She tried to push his hands away, murmuring words that made no sense at first, fragments about orders, about betrayal, about coordinates that should not exist. He tried to calm her, but she shook her head hard, her eyes wide with fear. No, not fear, something deeper, like she had seen something that should never have been seen. He scanned the horizon again, the world around them dimming into shades of gray. As the last light faded, something moved near the far ridge, too coordinated to be scavengers. He reached for his radio, but static swallowed the signal. He switched frequencies still. Nothing, the comms were jammed. He cursed under his breath, then caught himself. She was still mumbling half-coherent words about the mission that ended 2 years ago, saying they were never meant to leave, saying someone had sold them out, saying it was still happening. Now he did not understand any of it, but her tone carried the kind of truth that did not need proof. The sound of metal scraping on rock echoed faintly through the air, a sign that someone or something was closing in. He lifted her carefully, setting her back against the wrecked truck. She gasped in pain but nodded for him to go. He refused and stayed kneeling beside her, scanning through the scope again. He saw them then, faint outlines moving in formation. Too professional to be raiders, his pulse quickened. Whoever they were coming straight toward them. He turned back to her, but her head had slumped forward. He shook her gently, trying to keep her awake. She opened her eyes only for a moment and whispered one sentence that froze him completely. "They know you're alive for." A second, everything around him seemed to vanish. The smoke, the wind, the coming footsteps all fell away, leaving only that line echoing in his head. He had gone dark, after that mission erased from records buried under classified files. How could anyone even know he existed anymore? She looked at him again, her lips trembling as she tried to form another word, but before she could, a burst of light flared on the ridge and a sharp crack split the air. A round slammed into the ground inches from his boots. He dove behind the truck, dragging her with him, bullets stitching lines of dust across the earth. He checked his magazine, then peeked over the edge, scanning for muzzle flashes. He saw one and returned fire, the recoil biting into his shoulder. The figures scattered into cover. These were trained shooters, not militia. They knew exactly where he was and how to box him in. He glanced at Lena, her breathing ragged, but her eyes clear. Now she gripped his arm and pointed weakly toward a gap in the ruins, a possible escape route, but it would expose them for at least 50 meters. He weighed the risk, but there was no choice. Staying meant dying. He helped her stand, her weight barely there. She leaned on him as they moved through the smoke, each step dragging through ash and broken glass. The enemy fire slowed, perhaps thinking they had already gone. He used the lull to guide her toward the breach. The air grew colder and heavier, the smell of rain mixing with the dust above them, dark. Clouds rolled over the skyline, thunder rumbling somewhere beyond the horizon. They reached the edge of the ruins and paused. He could hear distant engines, maybe a patrol, maybe reinforcements. He raised his scope, but could not identify the vehicles. Then he felt her tug weakly at his sleeve and turned. Her eyes had rolled back slightly, and she whispered one more time, over and over, the coordinates, the same ones from the desert mission, repeating them until her voice faded to a rasp he recognized. Those numbers from an old map and outpost that was supposed to have been destroyed, but apparently was not. Before he could think further, a shadow crossed the ground behind them. He spun, raising his weapon, but saw nothing, just the smoke twisting in. The wind and the flicker of lightning reflecting off shards of metal. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes tracking them. He pulled her closer, whispering for her to stay awake, to keep moving. She nodded barely, but her legs buckled again. He caught Her before she hit the ground, the engines were louder now, and he realized they were not approaching but circling like predators. Closing a perimeter, he dragged her behind a mound of rubble and waited, listening. His heart beat loud in his ears. Then, through the static in his earpiece came a voice, low, distorted, but unmistakably human, saying his call sign, something no one should have known anymore. The voice said, "Stand down. We have her now," and then, silence pure and deep, like the moment before. A storm breaks. He looked at Lena, but she was unconscious, her hand still clutching the dog tags she had never stopped wearing. He reached for his knife, cut a strip from his sleeve, and tied it around her wound. The engine stopped abruptly. He could sense movement all around, the faint crunch of boots in the ash closing in from every direction. He steadied his rifle once more, but his thoughts raced not about escape, but about the question tearing through his mind. Who exactly was they? He pressed, his back to the cold stone, and took one last look at her face, pale but still breathing. She had survived something impossible and brought the nightmare back to life. He could feel it, the mission, the betrayal. The unfinished story now returning full circle, and he knew that whatever truth she carried was the reason they both were marked. He tightened his grip on the rifle, exhaled slowly, and waited for the shapes in. The smoke to show themselves, knowing the next few moments would decide whether either of them left this place alive. The smoke thickened as the Delta sniper leader pressed himself against the shattered wall, his mind calculating angles and distances. While the wounded soldier beside him stirred with shallow breaths, the night air vibrated with tension, and distant thunder rolled over the horizon, a strange rhythm mixing with the faint clicking of weapons being readied in the dark. He tried to quiet his heartbeat, but it drummed loud against his ribs, a steady reminder that he was still alive for now. The voice in his earpiece returned again, softer this time, almost coaxing, saying he could end it here, saying they only wanted her. He ignored it, his jaw tightening as he wiped sweat from his brow. The words dug into his thoughts like splinters. She had said, "They know you're alive." And now here was proof. He risked a glance around the corner, seeing figures moving in tactical formation. Black. Gear faces hidden their steps, soundless in the ash. These were not local fighters. These were trained operatives, efficient, precise, and far too confident. He felt the old instincts kicking in, the cold, methodical focus that had kept him alive through countless missions, but beneath it pulsed something else. Anger, confusion, and fear all twisted together. He looked at her again. Lena, her face streaked with dirt, her lips pale as she whispered fragments of thought, names, codes, pieces of a puzzle that refused to form a picture. She said they came back for the files, said the coordinates were never random, said the orders that day had been forged. He wanted to ask how she knew, but every time he tried, her words dissolved into trembling silence. The rain started as a fine mist coating the ruins with silver, the firelight dimming under the falling water. The wind carried voices close now, sharp and disciplined commands exchanged in whispers. He knew they were closing the circle, preparing for the final push. He adjusted his rifle, checked the last 2 magazines, then leaned close to her, speaking low that they had to move. She nodded weakly, her eyes unfocused but determined. He helped her up again, and they began to crawl through the rubble, toward the drainage trench that cut through the old compound. It smelled of rust and old oil, but it offered cover. As they slipped inside, the sound of boots passed above them. He could see the silhouettes through cracks in the concrete, shadows moving like ghosts. Every movement brought flashes of memory from the day she vanished. He saw the convoy burning, the shouts over the radio, the orders that made no sense. He had believed it was chaos. Now he understood it had been design. He whispered her name, asking, "What really happened?" She struggled to answer, saying the extraction never came, saying the unit that arrived was not theirs, saying she had been taken, not rescued. He froze, trying to absorb the meaning taken by who. She looked at him then, eyes reflecting a truth too heavy to speak. The same people who trained them, the same insignia that he wore on his shoulder, once now hidden under dust and doubt. He felt a chill run through him, colder than the rain, as realization crawled across. His mind, the voice on the radio, had known his call sign, and his file had been sealed years ago. Someone high enough to reach into shadows wanted him erased along with her. He checked the trench ahead. A faint light flickered from a maintenance tunnel. Maybe an exit, maybe another trap. He took her hand and pulled her gently forward, water splashing around their knees as they moved faster. She stumbled but refused to stop, whispering again about the outpost, the one from the coordinates saying it. Held something they wanted, saying she had escaped from there, and they would burn the world to keep it hidden. The sound of engines roared again, closer this time, and a spotlight sliced through the rain, sweeping the ruins. He shoved her down flat. As light passed over them, holding his breath until it moved away, the tension pressed heavy around them like the air before an explosion. He could sense they were running out of time. He guided her to the tunnel entrance and pushed her inside first. The metal walls slick and cold. They followed it for what felt like miles, each echo amplifying their breaths. The radio buzzed again with static, then a new voice, clearer, calmer, calling his rank and last name, telling him to stand down and surrender. It was the voice of his old commanding officer, the man he had trusted more than anyone, but that man had been listed dead in the same report that buried the mission. He froze again, staring at the radio, like it had become a ghost. He turned it off, slammed it against the wall to silence it, and they kept moving, her strength fading fast, her words slower, but everyone heavy with meaning. She said the files were about experiments, black contracts, secret deployments using soldiers like weapons. Then her voice trailed off, leaving only the drip of water and the thud of his boots against steel. He reached a junction ahead where the tunnel split in two, one path leading deeper underground, one rising toward faint moonlight. He hesitated, weighing survival against truth. She looked at him, barely conscious, and whispered the word outpost again. Then lost awareness. He lifted her over his shoulder and took the rising path, feeling the pressure of the chase behind them. The rain turned to downpour. Outside, as he emerged from the tunnel into an open stretch of ground, a field of wrecked vehicles and bent fences stretching to the horizon. The engines behind them grew louder, again shapes breaking through the mist, headlights cutting white lines. Through the storm, he ran through the mud, each step sinking deeper until he reached the broken remains of a supply shack. He ducked inside, setting her gently on the floor. She stirred slightly, mumbling that they would track his beacon, that nothing stayed hidden anymore. He checked his wrist device and saw the faint, pulsing signal. She was right. He ripped it free and crushed it under his boot, the light blinking out. He crouched beside her, watching her face as lightning flashed outside. She looked peaceful for a moment, almost too peaceful. And then her eyes opened wide again, panic flaring as she grabbed his sleeve, telling him they took others too, that the outpost was only one of many, that everything was still happening. He tried to calm her, but his own hands were shaking, because deep inside he believed her. He remembered whispers before the mission about off-record deployments, about numbers that never matched reports. Now the pieces began to connect, forming a shape too dark to name outside. The sound of footsteps returned, heavy, precise. They were surrounding the shack. He checked his rifle one last time, then looked at her, her breathing shallow but steady. She gripped his wrist with surprising strength and whispered, "Don't let them take me again." The words cutting through the noise like a blade. He nodded silently, then turned toward the door as the first flashbang burst against the frame, light and thunder filling the night. He dove behind a beam, returning fire as shadows poured in through the gaps, each muzzle flash lighting their faces for an instant. And in that instant, he saw the same insignia on their shoulders, the mark of his own unit. The Delta sniper leader fired until the magazine clicked empty. Rain mixing with gunpowder smoke as bodies fell into shadow. The shacks splintered around him, holes glowing with muzzle flashes. He dragged Lena toward the back wall where rotting boards gave way to open ground. The storm howled across the plain. Swallowing every sound, he broke through the wood and stumbled into the mud, pulling her behind a rusted vehicle. Her breathing weak, but still there. He looked at her face pale in the lightning glow and knew he could not stop now, because the truth she carried would die with her and him if they stayed. The radio on his belt crackled again, a cold voice ordering him to surrender, saying resistance would only worsen her condition. He tore the device free and threw it into the dark. The wind answered. Back carrying the echo of approaching boots, he loaded his last clip and whispered to her that they would reach the ridge, that someone out there would still be listening. She opened her eyes barely and said, "There is no one left to listen." Then her hand fell away from his sleeve, but he refused to believe it. He lifted her once more, his muscles burning, and began to climb through the broken field, each flash of light revealing more shapes moving behind him. He reached the ridge just as the rain eased and the horizon opened like a wound below. He saw what she had described, the outpost not destroyed, but alive, lights burning under layers of fog, vehicles lined in rows, a silent fortress hidden from every map. He felt his heart twist with anger and disbelief. She had been right all along. The mission had never ended. It had only gone underground. He laid her down gently, her eyes fluttering open long enough to see it too, and a single tear traced through the grime on her cheek. She tried to speak, but no sound came, only a breath that faded into the cold air. He sat beside her for one heartbeat, too long, then saw movement below. A convoy starting engines, heading toward the ridge. They had been tracked. There was nowhere left to run. Pressed his forehead to hers, whispered an apology, and then reached for the detonator he had carried since the first day of the mission, the failsafe meant to erase what should never be found. The wind carried the sound of vehicles drawing closer, lights cutting through the fog. He looked one last time at the woman who had returned from the dead, and then at the secret that had destroyed them both, and pressed the trigger. The explosion rolled across the valley like thunder, swallowing the rain and the lies together. The fire rose high enough to light the ruins of the outpost below, and for a moment the world went silent again, leaving only smoke drifting where the two soldiers had been the truth.